So in this short period of social distancing, we thought it would be great for us to experience a virtual meeting using Zoom, and gives you a chance to experience it. So then you can take it to your family, your business, and be comfortable with video conferencing. This is kind of our second of a series of state and regional virtual experiences that we are organizing for Policy Circle members. So this was really open just to Wisconsin. Last Friday we had one in Illinois. This coming Friday we will be doing one in Indiana. And with each of them we invite someone to bring a different perspective, but all of the conversation are grounded into the brief that we selected from our library that is called Stitching the Fabric of Neighborhood. And I thought it would be a really good brief to get us to really think intentionally about the pieces that hold together a thriving community. And each brief come with a discussion guide to facilitate the discussion. And typically a discussion goes through really 3 rounds. And the first round, we share the lens that we wear, reviewing the brief and thinking about a topic. And the second round is a deeper exploration. And then the third round is kind of what can we do in our community to really engage and move the needle. So in the interest of time, we will be ending this call at 12:45, and we'll be doing kind of one round. And this, as I said before, this will really be interactive. So we'd love for you to raise your hand, right now, as we'll be calling each of you to share. So first, I would like to invite, we have a special guest for this Zoom meeting in Wisconsin, and that is Tim Carney, who's from AEI. And Tim is a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and where he works on economic competition, cronyism, civil society, localism, and religion in America. And he's also a commentator with the Washington Examiner. And his latest book is Alienated America: Why Some Places Thrive While Others Collapse, which was published in February 2019. And we actually feature Tim and his book and his concept of his book in our brief, Stitching the Fabric of Neighborhood. When I look at the numbers on coronavirus and I see that New York has identified 30,000 new cases, and Wisconsin is at 463. I think it really highlights the differences that there is in the states and communities. And our former mayor in Chicago published, a commentary in the newspaper recently, saying that he doesn't think that the solutions will come from the cities and the state, but it will come from the federal. And I tend to disagree, and I feel that solutions and innovation will actually come from the communities. So I'd love to hear from you first, Tim, before I open it up. That's my personal point of view, and I'm curious to hear what everybody has to share. But Tim, I'd love for you to share, what is the role of business and civil society in a time like this and in all communities? Love to hear your perspective there.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. And this is a real tough time, particularly for someone like me, who my book, I argued what we need to do is get together more. And that right now, that would be a dangerous thing to do health-wise. So I think that there's a lot of harm to this whole experience that goes beyond the medical harm, which is that the steps we're taking now that I think are necessary, as far as the social distancing, the quarantining, some of these clothes in place, that imposes extra costs, that people are isolated from their neighbors, from their friends. This Friday was supposed to be my first meeting of this T-ball program I run at my parish, which is mostly just an excuse to have a parish picnic. It's the last thing I would do now, is bring together 15 kids getting dirty and all serving each other pizza. And I think that that's a real loss. What we've seen from business in this time is very interesting. For instance, a local brewery near me here in Montgomery County, Maryland, wasn't doing well. They were shutting down, and they said the last thing they were going to do before they went out of business was start making hand sanitizer, which is the same thing that lots of distilleries, people who make vodka, have started doing and giving it away for free. Others have started, the pillow company has started making the face masks. My Pillow, if you guys
Oh,
listen to the
yeah.
radio, you hear those ads. They're now making and selling face masks. And of course, it's the drug companies who, you know, we often have problems with their price gouging, or we have problem, you know, this or that, or they're lobbying. They're the ones who are working on getting treatments and maybe a vaccine down. So that's addressing the disease specifically. Businesses are also, we're asked the question that I'm most interested in: how are they addressing this, the social plague that's hitting us? The fact that people, you know, elderly people who maybe a walk in the park or going to church was the only way they got social interaction. When the church is shut down, is there anybody who can, thank you, is there anybody who can make up for that? So one thing is we have Zoom. This didn't exist 10 years ago, the technology we're using here. So that was a business innovation to do that, as well as lots of the other video conferencing things. But the fact is that we still don't have one of the things I talk about in my book is the third places, whether it's the barbershop, whether it's the diner, whether it's the local pub, whether it's the coffee shop, all of those businesses that you might have thought, oh, they're the ones, that's where I get my sandwich, that's where I get my cup of coffee, that's where I get my pint of beer, my wings, my half-price pizza night. Those were hubs that bring people together. And those specifically are the first ones that have been shut down by this awful plague. And so one of the things that strikes me is how those main street businesses really provided so much more than what we were paying for, which was the food or the coffee. And now we're absent then. So my hope is we come out of this appreciating, hey, let's walk down to the local diner. Hopefully we appreciate that more after this experience.
Yeah, and you know, how do you think, what do you think is the, you know, the best way for people to express their concerns, or, you know, like what's next? Because it seems like a lot of those businesses are not sure that they will be able to survive
Mm-hmm.
this more than beyond a month. And then what can people do to ensure that it really stays alive, and express maybe how this lockdown have impacted them?
Well, you have seen a lot of people say, like, for instance, I haven't lost my job at AEI. I have my examiner job. So sort of, I haven't lost income. And so from our perspective, we're saying we might down the line, but we know that the Stained Glass Pub and that Don Pollo, our Peruvian chicken place, both of these things walking distance from our house, that they're both in trouble. So we sort of almost gratuitously are ordering takeout from these places, even though what I love about the Stained Glass Pub is not their food or anything like that. It's the camaraderie. But I'm saying, okay, I do need food, and it costs a little extra money to do this, but it's thinking of it as an investment in my community. And so to think about it in terms economists would think about it, they often use the word externalities, which is to say a benefit that you get without having to pay for it. So, you know, my next door neighbor has cherry blossoms. He pays for the upkeep, but I get to look at them. So the benefit is being externalized to me. With these neighborhood hubs, again, the barbershops, the coffee shops, the pubs, the sandwich joints, etc. What they are externalizing sort of the good of community cohesion. There's this immediate commercial transaction. I give you money, you give me wings. But then the broader benefit to the society of now I know my neighbors more. So now I'm thinking about it from the other perspective of saying, okay, I was benefiting from that restaurant existing, even aside from our commercial transaction. So I'm going to invest a little bit more. I'm going to pay for that benefit by ordering the takeout, even when I might just want to eat the frozen sausage or whatever in my freezer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that is a I think it's true that it really brings to the forefront the importance of all of those businesses, and then what we need to do to keep them alive. So I'd like to open it up to our audience here. If you guys want to click on raise your hand to share your thoughts. share two things: how you are impacted as a business owner in your business today, and then what your business is doing to limit the spread of the virus, but also perhaps you as a family member, what you're doing to keep your community thriving there, and how you're seeing Wisconsin being really different than the rest of the states, and what could be the future. So I'm wondering if anyone has anything to comment. So I'd like to open it up, give you a moment to raise your hand. I recognize some names, so I might call on some people.
If you call on somebody, Sylvie, I'll unmute them for you. And I think we have one hand. Yes, Kim Bliss. Unmute.
Hi.
Hi, Kim.
Hey, thanks for hosting this. So I just wanted to say I am doing my part to social distance and respect the requests. I'm also not fearful of ordering from to-go restaurants and utilizing that option and supporting them. In fact, I come from my family's in the hospitality business, so I'm grateful that they're able to do that. However, my father is not even ordering from his own restaurants, because how can we guarantee that those cooks and those preparing the food are actually following the same protocol? So I guess my greater point is that I think my parents are doing the right thing by isolating themselves and doing what they can to quarantine themselves. And I feel very comfortable myself ordering food from these restaurants. But I do think there's a big loophole in there by saying it's okay to order food from these restaurants if you are, in fact, an at-risk person.
Yeah, have you seen, Kim, the Chamber of Commerce perhaps publishing, or even like your family restaurant publishing out what they are doing to prevent contamination, and that kind of outward positive, so that people are, and I'd like to invite everyone to share that even with their local media, what they are doing to prevent the contamination and show a sense of responsibilities. Do you have some thoughts there?
Well, I know that our restaurant is doing their part to, make sure that everything is sanitized, and they're working aggressively to do that. But what they can't control is what these employees are doing when they're not in the facility. They can't control who those employees are exposed to. So I'm not concerned from a facilities perspective about the locations being sanitized and clean per se, but how do we know what these associates are doing? When are they quarantining themselves, and how are they exposed to it? So I'm personally not concerned about it because I'm a healthy individual. I'm not concerned about it for my child. I'm a big proponent of, I think those most vulnerable and the elderly should be quarantined, and the rest of us should perhaps maybe try to have social distancing, but utilize the services that we can to the fullest.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point. Does anyone else would like to share? I'm seeing here. I have a question. Do we have another hand raised?
While we wait for somebody to decide what they want to ask, I want to go back to Tim's point about, your book being about coming together, and now we are social distancing. And I heard a story recently about, people that are in, going through drug rehab, and now they're being quarantined, and how lonely that experience is for them, and how we might have people slip back into, their drug habits because they're being quarantined. And it's just so sad. And I don't know what the answer is to it, but I keep hearing people say, and even the president say, sometimes the cure is worse than the disease. And that's where I feel like we might be headed, and so that kind of scares me. But we have a question from Rachel. So Rachel, I'm going to unmute you, and you may give us your thoughts.
Excellent. Hi, Tim. You mentioned a lot in your book about the role of institutions and also about political polarization. This is sort of tangential to what we were talking about recently, but I was just curious if you felt like we are more susceptible as a society right now because of social divisions or polarizations to something external threat-wise, like COVID.
Oh, wait, sorry, Tim. You go back into Once I unmute somebody, you go back into muted zone. So I've got to unmute you. All right, you're ready.
Got it. Now you can hear me?
Yes.
Great. No, so I do think that social trust is something we build up through often doing work together with people or just living side by side, but belonging to the same sort of things as people. And that's absolutely essential at a time of crisis. In other words, just think about things that you belong to. For me, I think of either my Catholic parish or my workplaces. These are places where we implicitly trust our neighbors. You know, the one of the stories I tell in my book is when my wife had to run out of mass one day, and she just told our oldest daughter, "You stay here, somebody will give you a ride home." That's a sort of social trust that that is diminishing in America. It's still there among strong religious communities, and it's more present, frankly, among what I call the elites. The neighborhoods where highly educated, college-educated people live are more likely to be the neighborhoods where the kids leave their bicycles on the front lawn and that sort of stuff. But yes, because we belong to fewer things, we're more fractured, we have less social trust. At a time like this, that does make us more vulnerable, exactly as you're saying, which is to say, that if I wanted to get together with, if a week from now and nobody's showing symptoms and there's a sister-in-law, we would say, okay, have you guys really been basically isolated and distanced, and we'll expand our little group to these two families. That would be the sort of thing that I would really need to trust that person in order to do that and still feel safe. The degree to which communities can trust each other, not necessarily to all jump into immediately going back to the neighborhood potlucks or anything, but just generally to trust one another, that you know when somebody's telling you something that it's true, you know that you're not worried about crime, about anything like that. We're better able to handle adversity. But again, the horrible irony of this is that now we're seeing each other less. We're belonging to things less. And so for somebody like me, it's really sad. But you talked about addicts going through recovery. Think about people in abusive relationships who are less able to find an opportunity to escape or an opportunity to find people. Anybody you can think of who's generally more vulnerable, this situation, they're going to suffer more than the average person, especially the average person with the privilege that we have of high-speed internet connections to organizations like this, etc.
Yeah, and I think it is important to even highlight. I think in our community and in the papers, the focus in the media is very much on the health issue. But I think on the vulnerability, the loneliness, the distrust that can happen in a times like this needs to also be highlighted and I don't know, even I think needs to be presented, but also shared what we are doing to overcome that.
No, that's right.
That isolation is really important. So I think we have another person here.
Janet?
Hi, I just wanted to share a couple of fun stories. My parents live 30 miles away from me, so I don't get to see them that often. And for the first time, we FaceTimed with my parents, so that was a huge technological leap for them. But what I thought was is they can't get out of the house. They're feeling very isolated, and their block had a clap out now every night at 8 o'clock. Everyone comes out of their house and just claps and plays music or bangs pots and pans to let each other know that they're all there and they're thinking about each other. It was just very heartwarming to me to hear that. I've also heard about people putting stuffed animal bears in their windows so that people with young children can walk around the neighborhood and look for stuffed bears to feel connection that people are thinking about others. I know that one of our members, Molly, was taking their lawn chairs out to neighbors. There's opportunity where people are thinking in different ways to connect with neighbors. Another neighbor had created a scavenger hunt for kids in their teens in the neighborhood. So he went out and found a bunch of different things that probably people don't notice or see. And then they can log into a Facebook page and find clues, and the kids can go around with their families and do a scavenger hunt in their neighborhood. So just some neat things that have come out of this that cause people to think differently about how to connect and be creative. So just some positive stories.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those. Tim, tell us a little bit about like your approach. You study in your book, you study different communities that are more, that are kind of the forgotten communities in America. How did you, what was your approach? How did you, identify the vulnerable communities? How do you measure them? How do you interact with people to gather information that inform your studies here?
So I'm a political reporter, and it kind of started with politics, which is to say, I thought the most interesting thing Donald Trump said when he announced he was running was the American dream is dead. And then instantly he had 25% of the electorate without saying much else. So I wondered, my hypothesis was there are a lot of people who are more likely to agree with this idea that the American dream is dead. And so let me see where, and not who voted for him over Hillary or who likes him now or anything like that. I don't talk about any of that. I just say the people who never voted before or who had never been Republicans before, and now we're standing in line outside of a rally in West Allis, outside of Milwaukee, like for 4 hours. Who are these people? Who's rallied by the guy who says the American dream is dead and everything needs to be changed? So that was a lot of my process for finding places. One place I found that was the opposite of that, where the American dream was very much alive in Wisconsin, was Oostburg. And I found it by asking the Dutch American Society, what is the most Dutch place in all of Wisconsin? And I went there and sat at Judy's Diner and met all sorts of people. And what I found was that it wasn't just the churches, but what the churches had built, the Dutch Reformed churches there, was an incredibly tightly knit community where the public schools were really full with involved parents. The businesses were supported by the people and they were supporting the community, etc. And on the other side, though, what I found, I would look for places where church attendance had fallen. I went to Uniontown, Pennsylvania, because Fayette County had massive decrease in people going to the Catholic churches and people who identified as evangelicals. And so church really was central to a lot of what I found. If you look outside of elite wealthy pockets, if you want to find well-connected places where not everybody has to have 5 advanced degrees between the husband and the wife, you were finding it in these strong religious communities. And if you wanted to see the working class places that had the worst outcomes, the most drug addiction, the most high school dropouts, the most teen pregnancy, etc., you could have predicted it by looking back a decade and seeing where were the churches closing, along with the go-kart tracks, the bowling alleys, etc. So that was my approach, to say you can't just have an economic explanation for what's going on. There's a social explanation. The institutions that were mentioned before, that's the key to where people are sort of able to keep their lives together versus people who find it a lot harder.
Yeah, I think we have another, I'll go back to that. I think we have another question here, or another comment.
Leah, you're up.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you doing this. I am looking at this through a couple lenses, and we always talk about that in our policy circle meetings, at what lens are we looking at these issues from. And I wear a public health hat as a nurse, but I also wear a public policy hat, somebody who works as a think tank and somebody who was formerly a lawmaker. And I'm having a hard time, and I'm grappling with the balance between those two, and how far do we go from a public, from a lawmaking perspective, or from, in this case, many of these edicts are coming down from governors, such as Governor Evers here in Wisconsin. Have we reached a tipping point? Obviously, I'm concerned about public health, and I'm feeling it incredibly personally because I have a daughter who is 32 weeks pregnant, and she's in the middle of New York City.
Wow.
I have a 92-year-old mom who has dementia. I can't go see her in the nursing home. But the civil libertarian hat that I wear is also somewhat alarmed by the extent to which we as Americans, we as Wisconsinites, are willing to just accept some of these edicts without any pushback. So from my perspective, you know, in the role that I currently have, you know, I am in a position to reach out to lawmakers and states and looking at what effect are these policy actions having on local taxpayers in the states. And so that's one other aspect that I think needs to be talked about. How do we help others? It's yes, helping our community members. I'm doing my part, ordering out, doing curbside, but we also have to get the folks that are in the positions of making these policy decisions aware of what effect their actions are having on individual citizens. Tim, I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really missing from the discussion now is that people frame it as public health on one side, the economy on the other, which first of all ignores the fact that, you know, these two things interact quite a bit. But the third part of this that I really emphasize is that isolation and alienation and community separation themselves are bad, aside from the economic impact. So aside from the GDP going down, it's worse when we can't go to church. It's worse when we can't see our neighbors at the pub. It's worse when we're not able to build new institutions and get together and that sort of stuff. And the toll is economic. The toll is higher. You know, all the deaths of despair. One of the sad things I talk about in my book are correlated with isolation. So there will be people who we're saving lives by social distancing, but there will be people who will die because of the social isolation. I mean, that's a very blunt way of putting it, but suicide, alcohol use, domestic violence, all of these things are caused by and exacerbated by people being alone and isolated from their communities. So there's a trade-off. The way I think about it, without having any expertise in public health, what makes this extraordinary is the hope that we can make really, the restrictions can be short-term. I just wrote a piece for the Examiner saying you could save a lot of lives by basically outlawing cars or making the speed limit 15 miles an hour, but that would have to go on forever. We're hoping that these restrictions on us are short-term, enough to do the flattening of the curve, enough to help hospitals, doctors, drug companies make treatment, make a vaccine, make it, again, the flattening of the curve that prevents ICUs from being overrun. So that's sort of the way that I look at it. On the other hand, when people lose their jobs, that's more than just an economic problem too. It's really bad for a mother's self-esteem to not be able to provide for their children. And then you lose skills when you're out of work. And then often you detach from, if you're loosely attached to family or community, being out of work makes you more detached. So yeah, the cost benefit is really complicated. And the thing that makes me err on the side of the distancing now is that I think it's a short-term fix. If somebody says this is what we're doing for the next 18 months, then I think, no, I don't think you're doing enough cost benefit analysis.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. Leah, I'd like to throw it back to you. If you could share with the participants, what would be the most effective way for everyone here in Wisconsin to influence or to share their stories and their views, their experience that echo what Tim was just saying about the importance of a community being together with their lawmakers or with the media? What would you recommend in terms of influencing the narrative, which is what the Policy Circle is about? If you could comment on that, it would be really great.
Sure, I think it's really important. You know, one thing that this has done is really brought people together. We're calling each other. I've talked to people I haven't talked to in a really long time. And that interface has brought out a lot of interesting points. People are questioning some of the edicts that Governor Evers put forth. Simple things like, I can take my dog to the daycare, but I can't take my dog to the groomer at the daycare. And there are a lot of inconsistencies in how this has played out in the state of Wisconsin. That's just one example. And I think the best thing to do is is people should be calling their lawmakers. I know the first reaction people will say is, well, they're not there. They still have staff working in the Capitol. In fact, each lawmaker has been given the option of either letting their staff stay in the office if they want to, or they can work from home. So calls are still going through, emails are still going through. And to the extent that there are certain aspects of this that are really affecting you personally, professionally, you need to reach out to them. And what I have found is always, for me, when people give personal stories, and really what we're talking about here are personal stories, and as opposed to form letters that people often write, you know, they're not listened to quite as much as a personal story about how a public policy affects your business or your life. So I would encourage people to reach out to their local or their state lawmakers, also our members on the federal side too, because obviously there are decisions that are being made in Washington that affect us as well.
Yeah, so in sharing the impact of this, of a long-term social distancing that would be just much more grave than the health impact, to really call for a cost-benefit analysis. So I think that's really great advice, and we will be sharing. And I think maybe Tim, it would be great if you shared, you know, as a correspondent for the Washington Examiner, from a journalist perspective, from a newspaper perspective, what do you think? What are the type of stories of what's the best way to share with the media? Because I think the media is playing such a big role in this. Mm-hmm. Those stories need to go out to media, so there's another narrative, another story that's being told, and perhaps you could share some advice there as a journalist.
So this is what I'll say is what reporters are looking for. The main thing we want to do is tell a story, tell people something they don't already know. In other words, we want people to say, oh, that's an angle I hadn't thought of. Let me read that article. So I read a piece yesterday. Again, it was about victims of domestic violence. I hadn't thought of how that was being affected. So if you have a story to tell, that's to say, here's something nobody else has written on, that's the best way to get a journalist's interest. Again, we don't want to write the same story that's been written 100 times. I always tell people, they're like, what do you want me to give you? These PR people who are all over Washington. I say, I want you to give me something that nobody else has. And that's the main motivation. So if you can just tell us, I mean, the dog groomer, like that you can keep your dog all day in dog care, daycare, running around with the humans and dogs, but you can't have their nails trimmed and their hair cut. Is there a public policy angle behind that? And Leah probably knows this already, but if you then do the next step and say, oh, and by the way, Mr. Reporter, here is a public health expert I can connect you with. In other words, some people joke, oh, reporters are lazy. We're not lazy. We're busy. And then half of us now are also running homeschool academies. So sort of framing up the story for us a little bit. Not saying you're definitely going to have to come to my conclusion, or here is the exact, they don't want to write opinion pieces, have most of the news side reporters, but tell them a story that they will say, if you have a story that nobody else has, that's what will motivate the reporter.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's great advice. Judy, you were going to call on?
Yes, Catherine. Speth has something to say. Catherine, it's your turn.
Hey, well, first, thanks for doing this. I feel very fortunate to be a part of this, unconnected, even though I am literally a mile from my nearest neighbor. But I'm not looking at this from a cost-benefit analysis, even though I'm a financial advisor and I am on the phone constantly because of that. It's more, for me, a constitutional question, and Leah sort of went there without stepping on it, but our right to assemble is being trampled on. And I don't know what crisis we just set that aside. So I guess that's,
no, and
I'm not hearing that anywhere.
I don't know exactly what the legal authority is. Some of it is, you know, if a fire marshal has a right to say you can't have 1,000 people inside your restaurant, they also have the right to say, well, nowadays the public health requirement is smaller. I think that's some of it, but certainly when it comes to religious gatherings, I'm extra sensitive about that. This is what they're not supposed to be doing. where I live in it's Archdiocese of Washington, we sort of followed recommendations of the governor and the mayor to end mass. And that made me really unhappy. If the governor had come out and said churches are not allowed to meet on Sunday, it would have been a lot more upsetting. And I'm sure there are places around the country that are dealing with this. And that really is a problem. And because I think that out of this, we need to sort of ease back into public life, taking the costs and benefits into account. That could be when we run into this sort of constitutional thing. If a lot of people prudently believe, you know what, now we can get together on Sunday for church or Saturday for shul, and a local official tries to stop them, and there's a rational, reasonable debate to have over that, that's exactly when the constitutional issues and the fundamental principles of liberty will kick in. For me, again, it's a little bit softened by the fact that I've been persuaded that these are prudent moves, and our local restaurants were shutting down before they were forced to, and our church was canceling mass, unfortunately, but canceling it before it had to, that I say, okay, right now it's not a constitutional issue in most cases. Again, that might be different. I don't know the story in Wisconsin, if you guys had different experiences with your businesses or churches or schools, et cetera, private schools being shut down.
Yeah, it raises a really good question. Thanks for bringing that up. I was just reading in the paper today that in Spain, the police was actually arresting people for congregating. So, that's really that raises that question. I'm not sure what happened here. I think Kim, do you want to Kim Hendricks, we are viewing your screen right now. I don't know if that's intentional.
That's the sort of thing I would do accidentally.
So you could hit the button, stop sharing, and then maybe, Kim, you want to share some comments?
Yes, I was trying to do that.
Uh-oh.
Kim, you're difficult to hear. Can you speak up? Nope. Kim, we're not hearing you.
Okay.
I'm going to mute her because I can't hear her, but Leah has another thing to say. So let's hear from Leah because we only have about 2 more minutes, lady.
I just wanted to follow up on what Catherine said. Catherine, yeah, I did throw it out there, and that is a really big concern of mine, the constitutional aspect of this. And, you know, if Tim, you didn't know some of the things that are going on in Wisconsin, but in Dane County, liberal Dane County, where our state capital is, literally, if people are called upon to report when individuals are gathering in groups of more than 10. And, you know, that to me smacks of an entire overreach and is very frightening as a precedent. And I do think that it's something we're going to be talking about for some time. You know, obviously certain precautions have to be taken. I believe that there is a serious threat to this virus. But the question becomes, you know, private sector individuals were already stepping forward to do things without the heavy hammer of government coming in. And I think sometimes we have to look at things with a little bit more balance. And I think that when the president was talking about the cure, you know, maybe worse, there's also something beyond the economic implications. I think there are civil libertarian implications that if we are willing as a society to allow this much overreach by government over this particular situation, have we just created a scenario where every time there's a crisis, we will be willing to submit to these types of actions by our government officials?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great way to, that is something to consider, and hopefully this is for a short period, and we will be back to normal in just a week or so. So I'd like to conclude our call here to be mindful of everybody's time, and we will be sending, so thank you so much, Tim, for sharing your remarks and really framing this issue and this concept of cost benefit analysis. I think you brought up some really good comments that we've captured, and we'll be sharing a post that summarizes this conversation also with the membership at large. So I invite everyone to really perhaps take the time today or tomorrow to frame your story of how this is impacting your life and your community, and share it with your state representative, share it with your local media and your local representatives in your city. So, and tell us about it. You can also post it in our Facebook page, on your circle page. So thank you so much. Judy or Nicole, do you have some concluding remarks that perhaps I missed?
Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, just to put a point on what Sylvie said, we will be sending out some resources, specifically a guide of how you can write a letter to the editor, with some links of some other editorial pages so you can get a flavor for how other people are designing their letters, and just some tips. And we'll also send you a template that you can use to contact your lawmakers. Sharing your story, you'll have different prompts in there that you can use and download as a Word document and share with your lawmakers. And then we'll also send some additional resources. As Sylvie mentioned, there's a laundry list of different things that the private sector is doing. So we'll send you that list and just some other things that are happening in the states from a policy and healthcare perspective.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Thank you, Tim, for your time on short notice. Good to meet you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Stay healthy.